The first time I met you was when you argued a case at the Supreme Court. You seem very familiar with the Constitution, so how do you respond?
Well, Shannon, that's right. The bulk of my professional career has been as a constitutional lawyer and litigator. And, you know, it is really sad to see this administration, this president, this Justice Department so consistently disregarding the Constitution, disregarding the law. And you look at Obamacare. Obamacare, this administration has decided to engage in selective enforcement. It's going to enforce it against some people, not against others, and the administration is not following the law as written. So, for example, just a few weeks ago, President Obama announced that he was going to unilaterally suspend the law for large companies with more than 50 employees. He was going to move the employer mandate until after the next election. Now, Shannon, you know, that has two important concessions in that. Number one, if Obamacare was working, if it were a good thing, President Obama would want it to kick in before the next election, not afterwards. The fact that he is scared about the American people realizing what a disaster Obamacare is and he wants to shift it to after the election, I think is very revealing. But number two, it raises the obvious question. If President Obama is willing to give a waiver to giant corporations, what about the rest of us? What about hardworking American families? And that's why I think Congress ought to stand together and defund Obamacare in its entirety, so not just big corporations getting a break, but every hardworking American family.
Well, Article 2 requires the president to make sure to uphold and faithfully execute the laws of this country. Are you saying he's not following the Constitution?
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. The obligation, the president has a responsibility to take care to faithfully execute the laws of this land. And President Obama, sadly, over and over again, has disregarded the law, whether it was on immigration, when he decided to order his administration to disregard the law of the land, to disregard the immigration laws passed by Congress, or on Obamacare, when he finds parts of the law that are politically inconvenient. Rather than trying to change them, he simply says, we're not going to follow them. We decide, or I decide, in the case of the president, who the law applies to and who it doesn't. And that's not the way our Constitution works. That's not the way a system of government that limits government power to protect the citizenry is supposed to work.
Well, how is it limited? How is he limited then? What check is there on the executive branch if he continues to make these decisions, his administration as well? Right. We've seen Attorney General Eric Holder, who, despite the ruling we got from the Supreme Court just a few weeks ago on the Voting Rights Act, making his pronouncement that he intends still to go after a number of states, including Texas, regardless of that Supreme Court decision. So what is to limit the executive branch?
You're right. This is the most partisan Justice Department we've ever seen. On voter ID, the Attorney General has essentially said he's going to defy the Supreme Court and ignore the law. And the question you ask is critical. The most important check that Congress has on an overreaching executive is the power of the purse. And that's why the next 63 days matter so much. In 63 days, the continuing resolution expires. That's what funds government right now. I have publicly pledged, along with Senator Mike Lee, Senator Marco Rubio, a number of others, that I will under no circumstances support a continuing resolution that funds even 1 penny of Obamacare. If we can get 41 Republicans in the Senate to stand together, or 218 Republicans in the House to stand together, we can successfully defund Obamacare on September 30th. And what it's going to take for that to happen is for the American people to rise up and demand it. That's why we've launched a national petition, don'tfundit.com. Don'tfundit.com. The only way this will happen is if hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans tell their elected officials, tell Republicans, stand for principle, use the power of the purse, defend the Constitution, and don't fund Obamacare.
All right. The funding of Obamacare is one thing. The other issue, of course, is the funding of the U.S. government. You mentioned 63 days left. There has to be some type of consensus to come to a continuing resolution, which is basically the funding mechanism to keep the government going. There are a handful of you, and it is growing, who have pledged that you're not going to vote for any continuing resolution that has anything to do with 1 penny going towards Obamacare. Now, there are those who are calling this, quote, terror politics. And those aren't Democrats. That's a Republican, Peter King, over in the House, who said that. And they're cautioning against taking this tack. So what are you to do in compiling those numbers you mentioned, 218 in the House you need, when there are a number of Republicans vocally and publicly saying they're not going to go along with this?
You know, I think the American people are getting more and more sophisticated. They've learned there are a lot of Republican politicians that like to say they're opposed to Obamacare. They like to cast empty symbolic votes. I think the House has voted 39, 40, 41 times to repeal Obamacare, every one of which was a meaningless, empty vote because it had no teeth in it. And I think the American people realize we want more than a fig leaf. We actually want people who say they oppose Obamacare, in fact, to oppose Obamacare. Because I'll tell you, Shannon, if this thing goes into effect, the administration's plan is on January 1 to start the subsidies, start the exchanges, and their idea is get Americans hooked to the sugar, hooked to the subsidies, because in modern time there has been no major entitlement that's gone into force that's ever been unwound. And so this is our last and best chance to defund it. The wheels are coming off. Its lead Senate author, Democrat Max Baucus, called it a train wreck. But here's the simple truth of the matter. If we're going to win this fight to defund Obamacare, it's not going to be won. This is not a fight I can win. It's not a fight Mike Lee can win, Marco Rubio can win. No politician in Washington will win this fight. The only way we will win this fight is if the American people, if the grassroots rise up in incredible numbers. If we go to don'tfundit.com, we sign a national petition, and every one of us picks up the phone, calls our elected officials, and says, talk is cheap. Stand up, use the constitutional power of the purse, and defund Obamacare now. If we stand together, we can win this fight. But if we surrender, as Republicans are so good at, it's guaranteed we will not win this fight.
So let me get this straight. This is a long sentence. We're going to be gifted with a health care plan we are forced to purchase and fined if we don't, which purportedly covers at least 10 million more people without adding a single new doctor, but provides for 16,000 new IRS agents, written by a committee whose chairman says he doesn't understand it, passed by a Congress that didn't read it but exempted themselves from it, and signed by a president who smokes with funding. Same sentence, with funding administered by a Treasury chief who didn't pay his taxes, for which we will be taxed for 4 years before any benefits take effect, by a government which has already bankrupted Social Security and Medicare, all to be overseen by a Surgeon General who is obese and financed by a country that's broke. So what the blank could possibly go wrong?